Hey y'all, welcome to the My Place podcast. Thanks so much for joining us today. I'm joined, as I normally am, by my dad, Jay McSwain.
Hey, and Mary, we're getting toward, at least when we're recording this, the end of the summer, so we've got a great fun subject to talk about today.
Yes, as many of y'all might have also spent some of your time this summer taking family vacations, maybe spending time at the beach or at the lake or at the pool. You might have been figuring out and finding ways to spend some of your discretionary time. If y'all go back in the archives a few episodes back, you might remember some episodes that Dad and I did on God and time. What is discretionary time? How do we use it? Does God care about how we use our discretionary time? And we both talked about some of the ways that we like to use our discretionary time. And one of those ways that we both agreed upon, even though I haven't quite gotten to the level that you're at yet, is that we both like to read. And if y'all are watching this on YouTube, you might see this huge stack of books that isn't normally here. I haven't counted them yet, but I think there's at least 10 right here, and we're going to talk about probably all of them today. And this is a fraction of the library that you have that you are still acquiring. And I know it's a fraction.
These are ones I've just gotten this summer.
Right.
In the last month, actually. Well, a couple of them, we'll talk about it, but a couple of them I've had longer than that.
Yes. And again, in the summer, many people do a lot of their reading for the year at the beach or by the lake or at the pool as life slows down. And so some people may think that this is just your summer reading list. We know that this is a monthly occurrence for you. I have some of the funniest pictures of my phone on my phone of you are pictures of us at Barnes & Noble. And I'll go through Barnes & Noble and we like to go hang out there, especially when we're at the beach. We'll take our annual trip there. We'll go our own ways, come back together. We'll each have picked out our books. I typically pick out 1, 2, maybe 3 if I'm really feeling determined about some of the books that I want to read. You'll come back with a stack of books, 2 of which you've already started reading at the Barnes & Noble. But one of the ways you love to spend your discretionary time is through reading. And as we were talking about what we wanted to talk about on this episode, we're coming back from vacation. We're wrapping up some of our conversations about spiritual gifts, looking at what we're going to keep talking about. But a lot of times on podcasts, people bring in experts. They bring in people with interesting life experience, great advice to share, a wealth of knowledge to talk about. And I would say you are one of the most, I think this is the right word, prolific readers that I know. I've never known anyone who puts in as many hours of reading as you do. And I know from asking you about it that you absorb a lot of the knowledge. It's not just a repeat and delete where you read it and you don't remember it. There's a lot of knowledge that you have acquired over years and hours of sitting in between the pages of books. And so I would consider you an expert, whether that be as a recommender of books, of authors, of how to evaluate what books you should read.
I sometimes feel like I can't be a recommender of books because I read so many. Every now and then there'll be one that just, wow, boom. But yes, I do read a lot.
If not a recommender, you could give a lot of book reviews based
Yes.
off of how many you have read over the years. So as an expert, I wanted to talk to you a little bit about that because it always fascinates me, just all of the variety in which that you read, all of the knowledge that you absorb, and also why you do like to read so much. So I just want to start from the beginning. What sparked your love for reading?
Well, even when you gave me the questions for today, I thought about that. And I had forgotten about this, but when I was in high school, I had to read a thick book called Centennial. They actually made a movie out of it. But as you know, I love the West. And I got fascinated reading that book. But then life goes on. And where my real love started was after I became a believer, and I actually have it today. One of the very first books that I read is called The Miracle of Love by Charles Allen. This book came out in 1972, and I got it in the 70s. And I will never forget a statement in this book all the years later. It says, you like someone because you love someone although. And that's been, wow, going on 50 years ago that I read this book. Not quite that many. I'm not quite that old because I got this right when I was in college, but I read it 45 years ago, you like someone because you love someone although. So maybe Dr. Allen, Charles Allen, has been long past, but maybe my love for books came from this book right here, The Miracle of Love. So
That statement I have heard you say before, and I had no idea that it came
that's where it
from
came from.
a book that you read, in one of the first books that you read. I think that is one of the evidences of the impact and value of a book in someone's life. If you remember one thing from
Yes.
the book, you spent hours in it. There are hundreds of pages. If you remember one thing from a book, that has left an impact on you. And I think that one phrase that even I knew about, I had no idea where it came from. That one phrase is evidence that that book gave you one nugget that you carried with you for the rest of your life. Speaking of that, what would you then consider makes a book good, in your opinion?
For me, what makes a book good is not everybody saying it. Like you read a lot of books on parenting, and they all say the same thing. Maybe they change the story, the principles are worded, but they're all the same. Most of the time, what captures me is when I'm reading something and it creates a new way of thinking that I've never thought to think that way on that particular subject.
So it creates a new way for you to think about something that you hadn't thought about before.
And maybe in a new way. It may not be a new subject like parenting, but a way to approach something is different. That's what makes books really good to me.
And this leads us into my next question for you, which is talking about the value that it brings. Obviously, if words or someone's ideas are bringing you a new perspective or a new way to think about something, that brings value. But reading in and of itself, what value does that bring to your life?
I love to learn. I love and I love to learn about things that may be in the future. I love to see why things are happening today the way they are, but I also love history. And I think there's so much we can learn from history. So I am a learner, and a lot of times, maybe I talk too much, but when I'm reading, I'm not talking. And so it is a great way for me to learn and to be stimulated and challenged in ways that I don't find probably anywhere else. And it is almost like when I'm depleted and there's nothing left in the tank, I need to go and get a few hours reading.
And to stay true to what we typically talk about here on the podcast, we talk about the different ways in which the Lord has wired us, whether that be our personality, our spiritual gifts, our abilities, our passions, our life experiences. To stay true to that, how would you say that you see your place profile in your desire to read, or how is your desire to read reflected in your place profile?
Yeah, well, one of my top abilities, and we look at abilities differently. In the days to come, we're going to unpack all of this in abilities, but we look at it as what is the environment that you will be competent and that you'll be fulfilled in, that you'll flourish in. And one of my top abilities is artistic. And one of the things about artistic, it's not can you just sing, dance, sew, or write, but it can be the way your mind thinks. Does your mind think outside of boxes? And again, what I told you, what I like, new thoughts. I like developing and creating. And so books give me those new thoughts because I like to look at things in ways, again, I said it before, that haven't been said just time after time. So I think the creative side of me, I find that in reading books.
I will say I think that is one of the values of the assessment is oftentimes we will gravitate towards our desires, towards our tendencies, towards the way that we're wired. But the assessment oftentimes gives us the language to articulate the gravitations and the tendencies that we have so that we understand why we do what we do. And sometimes we need to understand why we do what we don't want to do. In a way, we're going to gravitate towards what we want to do, and being able to articulate that is great. But on the flip side of that, it also gives us the ability to articulate why we do what we don't want to do, why we have some of the weaknesses that we have, but also how we can counter some of those weaknesses, how we can solve them. You said when you're depleted, you know what you go to. You naturally gravitate towards that. But in that moment, you're able to articulate, this is how I'm feeling. This is how I need to recharge. This is something that I enjoy, that I gravitate towards, that recharges my battery, because I can identify that and I can articulate that. I can identify the problem and I know that what the solution is because I have the language and the awareness to identify that. And that's a lot deeper than you like to read.
Yeah.
But it ties back to why we do what we do and what the value is of that is because it can articulate so many different areas of your life. And it can give you just the language to articulate, this is why I gravitate towards this and this is why I really enjoy it. But going back to our conversation tonight, because I am dying to know about all of these books. And I know you have a bit of a system in figuring out what book you're going to read next. So how do you decide what 10 next books you're going to read next?
Okay. So one of the things I'll say is this is my e-reader right here. And most of the books that I get on an e-reader are books that I'm reading for pleasure, because I can remember pages, and I can read a book 20 years ago and I can remember where certain things are on left side of the page, right side, how far down. But on e-readers, you can't retain as much. So when I'm reading for enjoyment, like I just finished a book. It was about the 2024 election, and it told it from all the perspectives of Donald Trump's camp, from Hillary or Kamala Harris's, and from Joe Biden. It kind of gave the scoop on that. Well, and you'll see, how do I pick what I read? I realized years ago, Mary, when I'd gotten out of ministry, as you know, for a few years, worked in our family's business, and then I got back in the mid-90s. And I realized that I had a lot of workaholic tendencies, that I would be consumed. And so I thought to myself, I've got to do something that can give me a diversion. And so part of my madness into what I read, and I remember the book that I read the very first time that got me hooked on reading every year a lot of books about politics, and it was by George Stephanopoulos. I read it in the late 90s, and he was the person that gets up and tells what's going on at the White House, the communications or whatever.
Correspondent?
Yeah. No, he wasn't a correspondent. He was the person that was the spokesperson for the president, White House briefings. And he wrote a book about, and it was a thick book, I remember, about his time in the White House. And I'd never read a book on politics. I never had to want to be in politics, still don't. But I realized I was fascinated with what we see on TV versus what happens in closed doors. And so I read a lot of books on politics. Matter of fact, my last one down here is a book that Bill Clinton wrote called Citizen. And I am an equal opportunity. I will read both sides of politics, not just where I may lean more toward, but this is a book that he came out with on politics. And so you're asking me, what is my madness to it? And I'll probably answer a lot of your questions here. And I'll just go, can I just go through some
Please.
of the books? So this is, you asked me today, I told you that I'm going to be reading C.S. Lewis, Mere Christianity. You asked had I ever read it. I haven't. Well, starting tomorrow, our staff, the pastors at our church, are going to take each week, and one of us have to explain a chapter in here. So we start reading this and going over it tomorrow. So that book is in this list because we're going to be reading it as a pastoral staff at our church. Jordan Peterson, he's kind of famous, right? I have not known a lot about him. And last year, when we were writing our book on the dark sides of personality and how to overcome them, I remember the young lady, Zora, that helped us in the editing and putting it together. She had asked me about Jordan Peterson and didn't know much about him. And then he got in a lot of trouble up in Canada for some stances. But we who wrestle with God, perceptions of the divine, and again, you said we go to Barnes and Noble and I pour Cain, Abel, and sacrifice. And he talks about some deep subjects in some ways that I realized I didn't really know about from that perspective. So that's Jordan Peterson. I think this is my third book this year on Elon Musk. I read a lot of books about well-known people in contemporary society, business people, church leaders. I love reading how other people, our ministry is about understanding people. And I'm not going to go into opinions here, but I am pretty fascinated with his life. And this book is called Hubris Maximus, and it probably wasn't written in a real flattering way about Elon Musk, but that's Elon Musk. Francis Chan, Multiply. It's about making disciples. And so much, we're going to actually have a podcast coming up about how our tool is part of a disciple-making process. And I think when we started looking at some topics a while back, I picked this up at the bookstore, and it's been pretty interesting. Obviously, he left the kind of mega church world and has a different model of discipleship. And so that's why that one is. Here's a book. As you know, for 6 years now, we do a daily devotion. And each year I pick a book that has a 365-day devotion that I send to you, your sister, your mom, and my almost-to-be future son-in-law. And so it's that time because we start a new book on August the 23rd, because that's when we started our first one. And so this one is by Alistair Begg, and it is Truth for Life, 365 Daily Devotions. It's a little different than what we've done in the past, and so I'm trying to decide, do I want to do that one? We're putting together a coaching course, so this is a workbook right here. And one of the guys at our church told me about this book, and it's got a lot of fascinating stuff in it. So I'm reading this from a work perspective. This was a fascinating. Remember, I like the future. I like history. This one is a brief history of information networks from the Stone Age to AI. And so this is going to cover everything for me. I did a coaching session with a gentleman that had been involved in a lot of Satanism and had really actually made some commitments in a marriage ceremony to Satan to raise a kid, and then God saved him. And this is called Reclaiming Surrendered Ground. The foreword was by Dr. Charles Stanley. And this is a subject that a lot of people in a lot of circles, like where Dr. Stanley's church is, where we'll be at in a couple of weeks. He's not there, obviously, now he's in paradise. But I found this book fascinating because a lot of people that are not in that, they see a demon behind every bush. They don't want to go and deal with subjects like this. And I found it fascinating. So that's why I'm actually finishing this book up. And again, here's the book by Bill Clinton, Citizen, My Life After the White House. So some of my little summer reading that I have.
How often would you say you read books where you disagree with the stance that the author is taking?
Oh, quite often. I read a lot of books that I disagree with the authors. I read where I agree with some things they say, but disagree. I'd say sometimes and again, I'm not going to go where I'm at politically because that's not what this podcast is about. But I read a lot of books written by people that are totally not of my political persuasion. And I disagree with a lot that they say. But again, that's part of that learning for me, that I love to hear things from different perspectives. So answer, a lot.
So the stance or take that the author is taking might not necessarily influence whether or not you pick up their book.
Oh, no, it doesn't. And well, sometimes it does, because sometimes I want to hear their view on something. But I do have a criteria that I look at when I want to say I'm going to read this book.
When it comes to topic and author, what is some of that criteria?
Topic and author. Again, it's something that I'm interested in from a topic standpoint. I don't read any fiction books, none. But from the author standpoint, most of the people that I'm going to read about and read from, you've never heard of them. Because a lot of times people, we were talking, I'm not going to say the guy's name because I have a lot of respect for him. But there is a pastor, a well-known pastor that God has used in immense ways. And I read his book and I didn't like it. He's a great speaker, we were talking about. He has a great delivery, but I don't think he's a good writer. And I normally am going to pick books based on people that live in one field, not someone who's famous that learned how to market themselves, but someone that lives in a field like we live in this area of spiritual gifts. I don't want to read a book from some famous pastor who did a 6-week series on spiritual gifts and then wrote a book on it. I want to read books from people who have lived in that subject for years and years.
So in other words, they write because of what they know. They don't write because they're known.
Oh, how can you be so articulate? Why can I not say that? They write, say that again. That is like priceless.
They write because of what they know. They don't write because they're known.
Very well said. Yes.
So what would you say is, and it might be, maybe use that first one, what would you say are some of the most influential books that you have read that have impacted your ministry or your walk with the Lord?
Wow. It was very interesting. 4, 5, 6, about 6 years ago, 7 years ago, I had known who Dietrich Bonhoeffer was. I'd never read anything about him. And one of the guys in our mentoring group, we read a book together each month. Then we do a 1-page write-out of the book. And he recommended a book by Dietrich Bonhoeffer about his life. And the book was like 700 and something pages long. Normally our books, I try to pick books at 250 pages. I was fascinated that someone could be that. And, he ended up losing. They killed him. And we read about people, back in the first century in the Bible, but it was riveting that he would be, his thing is the cost of discipleship. That was a really impactful book. Another book that came out in 1979. And I got the book way back in the early 80s, mid 80s when I went to seminary. And it's called Your Spiritual Gifts Can Help Your Church Grow. And it was written by, and I know those of you that watch this, you don't have to send me all these mean, nasty things about Dr. Peter Wagner. Dr. Wagner has gone probably from persuasions that a lot of people that probably even would listen to this podcast would not agree with. But he wrote that book in 1979. You can still get it today. And I'm going to tell you something. A 46, 7-year shelf life is a long shelf life. But so much of what I know about spiritual gifts started in reading and rereading and pulling that book out. I got some more copies of it now, but I got my original book that, again, I got back in the 80s. But that was a big book for me. You said if you can remember one thing, then you've heard me make that quote. You like someone because you love someone, although that book, The Miracle of Love. And I don't know, it's about 1 Corinthians 13. It's just a great book. And so I have thousands, as you know. I have a warehouse of books, so many of them, but and I'd really put the George Stephanopoulos book up there because it really gave me a love, and I use that word love, a desire to have a diversion, which would be reading books about politics that I have no desire ever to go in. So that book was really instrumental. So those are some.
What would you say to people? You said that book was what allowed you to have a diversion, a break to get your mind off of ministry, off of work. What would your word or encouragement be, the value that you have found in being able to have a diversion, being able to have something that you can recharge in? And how is your ability, because we've talked about all the books that you like to read, which I find fascinating. Not everyone is necessarily going to go pick up one of the books that you talked about, but everyone has a job or a ministry that they do. What is the value that you have seen in your personal life, in your ministry, and in your work life, and being able to have a diversion that you love that allows you to recharge?
Yeah. And let's just make clear, not everybody will have the same passion for the diversion that I have. Like your mom does not have a diversion of reading books, okay? I think that all of us get depleted. I think that there are different things in our life, different tasks that we do, things that we're responsible for, have to do, that deplete our energy and just zap it from us. And I think all of us need to figure out what it is in our lives that can re-energize us. And for me, it happens to be books.
You know, these conversations, I always think about why we have them, and it's to be an encouragement to other people, to give a word to their season, to encourage them, for them to learn something. If they remember one thing from a conversation, in the same way, if you remember one thing from a book, then it was worth writing. If they remember one thing from our conversation, it was worth having and it was worth them listening to. So if there's one thing that y'all remember from this conversation, is that there are things in life that will deplete us, but there are also things in life that can replenish us. So find what that is for you. Find the things that will help you learn, or help you rest, or help you laugh, or help you enjoy the life that the Lord has given you. He's given you a ministry or a calling or a vocation that He's called you to, but He also set aside a whole day for you to rest. And there's so many ways that you can replenish the energy that has been depleted in your life. So we just had a great conversation about the ways that you replenish that energy. So for y'all, I would encourage you to go find something that replenishes your energy so that you can fulfill the calling that the Lord has for you. You can pursue the good works that He has for you with a full cup, that you can find something that fills your cup back up when you feel like it's empty, so you can feel more effective and fulfilled in the places and for the people that He has called you to.